rani chi so la ne chen la de chi te go ba tem ba sra ati gi chira ge ma do shan chu ku sen ko do ji shi ma di go ndu ba sen nyam ye da ba mo de ji shi wa che ane ta na di la da zawa de na kal na do na ngo so ju ba yi sra do na ngo so ju ba yi pende ma na ko la bu mai ngo ta kasi mai nu da dunya ta sai da da len ba shows la ra on
yes. So then moving on with the text, we are at the 7th verse of the root text, and the 7th verse talks about the practice of taking on the suffering of others and giving them happiness. And this is a particularly very important practice of a bodhisattva. First, the generation of the attitude that you and others are equal, and then this practice of exchange of one's own happiness for others, and taking upon their suffering, taking upon yourself their suffering. And the actual root text itself, it reads, in brief, in brief, directly or indirectly, I will offer help and happiness to all my mothers, and secretly take upon myself all their hurt and suffering. Yes.
Sedi mamene jawan hama macha de ora mundi kadan dan matla de tanda machi por khoe ra de che ta tanda di kala khashna donang no juba isla chao kharana ra dona kesi ta ngazo e gana ma pu ji she de parwa tai gama ni ma de tis ko de tu ra che tan din le dona khasi to chen she bai na krai mi chi la ngus phen to wai na re ani juni ra khatu mi ha ma ko na kran gyo le phen de ra ra dei bai na re ani kande ji chewe na ne phende phembe ta dewa dinde di ani mana ko la ba suzu ta samje ge jaw ha ma tenche ma che ma ni bi ji me bai nza ani simje de da la phen yi chi de pa phu gu res la ra ta kunu ga ta po tende kunu sha ko ma shimba nam san ta ta to ma ra.
So herein in the root text, when we read the verse, and the second line, it reads, I'll offer help and happiness to all my mothers. And as we kind of discussed before, from the Buddhist perspective, then all sentient beings are referred to as mothers, and we are encouraged to develop such an attitude of gratitude to all sentient beings, because we also talked about how from beginningless time, in the countless births we have taken in the past, even though if they are not our mothers in this life, these sentient beings have at one point in time served as our mothers. So it is especially important to develop this kind of attitude towards sentient beings. And then now, as we kind of discussed all the verse and the meanings, and we explored it in great detail, the verses that came before, then we now are able to kind of understand the later verses more clearly. And as the verse, 7th verse, it says, in brief, directly or indirectly. And herein, in brief is to kind of sum it all up. Now all these methods, all these techniques that we have discussed so far. So in brief, to sum it all up, whether you are directly benefiting someone, wherein someone knows that you are helping them, or rather whether you are helping someone indirectly, wherein some people, wherein the object of your benefit, they do not know that you are helping them, then you should first learn to cultivate this motivation in ourselves, that you will offer your help and happiness to all mother sentient beings and secretly take upon all their hurt and suffering to yourself. So immediately to kind of put this into practice is very difficult, and it's kind of an aspirational practice for us at this point of time. And for that, the motivation is important, and this is why in this particular from this particular verse, I think the kind of takeaway that we need to know is that we need to have the right motivation. Thus.
단다 아니 말라 수수 아마도스다 땅에서 순주타지 수수 마이 상투나 디기 아니 테스치기야 디기 동해로 데루제라 산코에 레타야라 제장 데네기다 수수기 마체 많이 베치자 메워인자 마데다라 단다가서 동해기 나데와 통하이나라 아니 콘줄레 네바다 아니 콘줄레 데리기 동해 데리기 통되어 있는 딘주 상만 가라랑 슬랭게 요소가 보는시라 아니 수수기 따기 되어도 파부고라서 어디나시기 상회기 아니 다라 슬렘바 라 kasi khatu nganzo chile do china chore ande mai ki phage ki mi ki khana ki dungi de sege ma ha ko ge na ra ma go na da khanda phage la ka ngi se ya thapsi ta te ha ma go yun to le ka ngi de sine tele ya ge se che ra re wala ke kalo manzo ki re wala ti yo ma kalo dengam do yo ma ra mi ha ko an ye fa ya bo ko ha ko na ngal ji chi ge sa re wala che ra ha ma go to ne an tan 파로바체는 스치칼로 소리 등에도 쓸래 이나데 문디 다 뜻깔로 게세로 쳐라.
So then when we talk about developing this attitude of gratitude to our mother sentient beings, then herein the Buddhist kind of teachings advise us to kind of view sentient beings as our mothers, because if we are able to do that, if we are able to look at sentient beings as mothers, then our practice becomes a little bit more easier, wherein like this actual practices of offering help and happiness to them and secretly taking upon their hurt and suffering, this practice becomes a little bit easier for us, because we adopted such a view of sentient beings. Because then we feel like, okay, we owe our gratitude to them, and because of this, it falls upon me to kind of do this in return to sentient beings too. And so this is why it is encouraged to adopt this view that we should look at sentient beings as our mothers. And then when we talk about secretly taking upon ourselves their hurt and suffering, then if you are able to do this, then it is more profound and more pure, the practice. If you are able to do it secretly without any expectations or such, then the practice becomes more profound and pure, in the sense that the kind of merit that you gain from such a practice, secretly taking upon their suffering and hurt, is more profound, because it's not tainted by any sense of expectation in return. Thus.
다간전 성을 사회기 얘기 군주도 니들 간데슬랑 라 강이들 간데세올 다 상월은 내가 저기 얘기 엔데로 나랑 팅이더라 배나 이 다투 칸도다 예수 칸도라 다저 진다로 내 나도 지기여라 나도 또 고마타 산내네 엔데 친이만 보여라 다간저 메스 파츠로 빠치고여라 평안에 봐 딩고스기 그냥 로바치 하마고네 디치스들라 아니 내가 옛날에 경고 옛날에 직스이는 콜 팬데고 와 그 강의도 그냥 렌조도 세워 뒤에 지 얘기 드레상도 하라 다나서 상에다 소소게 강의 렌조도 세워라 와 무슨 그냥 원신이 말이 미시고 말을 수인가네 배제도 간에 당하고 말때 그냥 이 주니 아니 그냥 갈래지 니마다 쇼기는 본다 보들려가 래 갈래지 앞에시 사샤주디 간다 미지기 강의 세워라 라 사람이 또 미주든들 강의 세워라 아니 네바 자라들라 아니 회주 땅에 간다 콜 팬도 오래 있는 그냥 네바도 수이 하고 말해 거기 땅이 되게 수 땅이들 하고 말돼 간다 찍찍을 강의 세리고라 네 엔데로지 하긴 이 강의 세주로 제탱이 빼나라인들아.
So then when we talk about the practice of secretly taking upon ourselves their hurt and suffering, and then without thinking of about it in esoteric terms, then let's try to think of a practical example in which this kind of practice is evident actually. Now when we talk about orphanages, or even like the nunnery itself, then we have in orphanages and in nunneries we have many sponsors. And many of these sponsors remain anonymous, but they are actually directly helping the nuns as well as the orphans. And the orphans and the nuns do not know who these people are. And also the sponsors, they do not really know the particular people to whom like they are like bringing this benefit. So herein we see that we can look at this as an example of the secret practice of taking upon oneself the hurt and suffering of others. Thus.
대가나시 가상에만 가져라다 코로나에 나서 유저들 레디가라 아니 미 동회신들이 가시기 지나 뭐 보셔서 지금 해 파수 땅에로다 뭐 보이던 땅 네버시 네버디 수수이 싫어하고 말아 달롱바디기 네버를 라야지 갖고 와 있네 수수네 도만나게 계산나게 스링나게 스네들이 하고 말아 네 코로나에 때 네버들 땅세 되거라 네버스 있는 시기 강이 쓰 되거라 넌 사마 파기 강이 쓰에다 동에도 슬렌지로 셔워라.
So then another example that we can look at is as we all lived through the pandemic of coronavirus, and during those times we've seen many people who practice generosity in the sense that they donated a lot of medical items as well as medical equipment to different places. And the people who are being benefited do not really know this, who are these people who donate this, and the people who donate them, they don't really know each of the individual people who are being benefited. They only know about like this goes to a certain country or a certain village, and these are all real life examples of the practice of secretly taking upon oneself the hurt of others and hurt and suffering of others. Lesson.
담보간도 로장 우리가 수수기 상우다 미 심바게 강이 간데슬랜드 호레 수수기 대화도 동에 사마 밀바테 투에 깔 커버 근데 대두도 파샤시 잘라 저거 전부지나 밀바테 투에 깔 커버 라 잘라니 미질라 잘라 조지 요바제 수수가지 빼아버진 디 조절라나 뜻깔 커버 라 대화도 동에도 파샤시 타인 로 공부를 담보 거는 수수사모 땅 아니 가래 아니 뭐 이게 그리 치투도 따라 담보가 카들라나 아주 로 쇼에 말이라.
So then if we kind of immediately try to adopt such a practice, then this is very difficult. And but we know that the way we act is most of the time is invariably shaped by the intentions and the thoughts that arise in our mind, and this is why it is important for our mind to familiarize itself with such intentions, and it's important for our mind to train ourselves in cultivating such motivation and intentions. For example, when we talk about this practice, offering help and happiness to others and taking upon their hurt and suffering, it's a particularly difficult practice. For example, let's forget about like offering your happiness to others and taking their suffering. When we have something of value in our possession, let's see if you are able to let go of that particular possession of value to someone else. In that moment, we realize that it is very difficult to let go of it. And so from herein, we realize that it is a difficult practice. So then how do we aspire to be able to actually practice this? By training the mind, by familiarizing the mind with the intention.
hingimadil lojijura si chapchorujura yamadi khasa je melarba ta khona kheba che nyamle ba che chirwa gyono de penjo khaime khora be kala doshin shoshi kalaine khora kedangi gomdu nyam janjan che kalaine sabudine chiri tilege ne be nyamle ba je sara ne khora ngi nimaji kita sunchoro na andesida ne nyamle chirang ro kanso jimba tang tang ro mo sun sara tamiji ngone yewa shu cho ne jimba tang sara ra khora yejo cha mate inde jimba tang ta je jil ta ko de jodu gala ne juba che kare ra par de jimela ro be chela ya khalo khadung ro ta jo khora pang go chigame ngaya pang go so ne ro de le ra nga zo su tang go le ne cherem de ma jana mo zan de le sigra ne ta jinga zo nyam che go la sam da chebi cheba yi ma de khanda di 캡도 저도 저라 미글런 줄이 안 감서 지치지 아 제가 있는 안 주버지 돼요 근데 지죠 말
So then in medieval Tibet there was a great yogi called Milarepa who was a highly realized master and who always stayed in seclusion and kind of practiced his meditation and so on and so forth. And he was such a serious practitioner that for his sustenance he only used to eat nettle leaves. And then came a time then Milarepa started to give teachings to lay people. And in one of the teachings, Milarepa talked about the practice of generosity and how one needs to engage in such practice. And one particular person was greatly inspired by this teaching, and then he immediately started to give away all, whatever he had. And then initially he had no qualms about giving away his possessions. But then as he keep giving away, then he realized that sooner or later he will be left with nothing. And then he began to feel a sense of miserliness, that I'll be left with nothing now. And then he started to scold Milarepa that you had nothing in the first place, and now you made me someone with nothing. So there's such stories serves to illustrate the point that we need to train our mind first rather than jumping straight into practice. Yes.
Surne khatu nga chirange chala lemana se ki mi dunge khatu le thuwe kale khabra shuji toko toko ni bathowe ne thusigra ne mato nga khatu kale khabres suzugi dewa in lamsangi dewa dirila ni chirana patet kale khabra ine lo kompa ngi indi chi yesa ne nga kangi chi nga roba che ro de chi thu da ko kangi me base de lo yo komya mata de ne ngo chugura shibaya nga samgra ti temnal ti jude de sayule de batis nga ne chi thumare zumaro re thingra ra ine ati zuma mare de chi thuni yore ine nga tambo lo la undu gala shong ma de su je tu re thingra tambo ine tambo so sanu khotu da ani khali kal lale ta to ni khale ya dor ma se tambo temna nga thodi gala de su chi thu sa chi thumaro thida.
So then as we look at this particular practice mentioned in the 7th verse, then at first glance it is kind of impossible to put this into practice. How are you going to take secretly upon yourself others' suffering? This is physically almost impossible to do. And then if you look at it like that, then of course it's an impossible practice. And this is not to say that because it seems impractical, then it is false. No, because there are people who are actually spend their lives dedicating themselves to such a practice. And the way we need to approach it is to take small steps, let the mind be trained with small steps, and let the mind become familiar with these techniques first by developing the good intentions and motivations. And slowly then you will see for yourself the results in your practice.
Zamzang ene jang do akhasan susu u ya thien de gal ra tam tam jang ta ro jira lo yin do anzo lo jong le lo u de thien de gal ni yin tu nge leng ye yes na susu ge chi u de ma ta le nge gi de wa chang ma te yes tam bu de ne chin chin ne san lo khwe jira do sang ende do chi.
So then one of the techniques that is taught in order to practice practice this secret exchange of one and others is to mount this practice on one's own breath. As you take in a breath, then taking the breath with this motivation that I'm taking in all the suffering and hurt of others, and then as you breathe out, then be informed with the motivation that as I breathe out, I am dedicating all my happiness and I'm offering all my help to all the other sentient beings. So in a meditative session, you could practice this. Thus. So these are all very practical techniques that are mentioned, that are taught. in the Buddhist tradition, for example, genuine practitioners, when we all know that it is hard to let go of our possessions, and the practice of generosity kind of teaches us to let go of this and give it to others. So when it's hard for us to do it, then in meditative sessions, these practitioners first practice it by taking, let's say, this pen in one hand, and now meditating that now this is in my possession, and then putting it in your other hand, and then thinking that okay, now I gave it to someone else. Then again and again, training the mind in this manner, and then the attachment to that particular possession lessens. Yes.
Ale odi dinipa jabla patolo ale jaw hama ko nge phamare the ra tha ring dung da du ring du jima to ya phama yin bachi pai ma san inza ani pha ba lo je cher ta thela tendo isara.
So then when we look at this practice from our own experience in life, then it is kind of tough for us to initially practice generosity to someone we do not really know or have a relationship with. This is tough. Either when that particular person that we do not know is in great distress, only then we feel the urge to kind of practice generosity or to help these people. Otherwise, we do not really have a sense of generosity toward people we do not know. And the kind of way that we can adopt the practice of generosity by training the mind is in this manner, that if we are able to practice generosity, let's say, with our parents, and since we know that our parents we are indeed very grateful to the way that our parents raised us, and for the fact that they nurtured us, we know that we feel a sense of obligation to kind of be generous with our parents. If we are able to accept that, and in that instance we are able to practice generosity, then analyze that and try to apply all these other kind of motivation that is taught by the text, wherein if you are able to practice generosity with your parents, then all other sentient beings, from the Buddhist perspective, have served as your parents in a previous life. So there is no real difference. It's just that it's a moment in time that they are your parents, but all sentient beings have been your parents. So it befalls on you to practice generosity in same manner with all sentient beings too. So this is the manner in which we can train our mind to these practices. Yes.
Susu the kiwu da dewu da tenu dewu ra simje yin bichane nga zo ta miji bichane yin re do simje ji bichane yin nga le ende de ban ji khole de sama chibara sama dungi la ga ma sama dewa la ga ra de yin ba chiba yin ba ta wa yin ya tes ale nga ga ngi de de min ne kola kho de re kola ka de ko ya rashi ki chigo ji chegra chita bonso chu ka di yin nga zo mi tunji ra ra pa ju sama mi ma do mi ba chiba Terejipa Sanatanton, I think Rashi Chambodo, they do him, yeah, some of the one to him and they were chisung him. Taking only look sometimes paying it to the. They couldn't do Kandi in Asian Suda. This way the only Jinses. On the Shambaya, Koshashu and Lushu and Achi Jiring up a very damaged Kachiru. And the summer cheap by me, but cheap by a magic song. The Nalo and Sama, they want to do him in the Ra, Mr. Shambaya, some and Yamdurushan and other Rashi. Sama pingerna se thanya buro sama chiparo cheda digi tambu sama shambelo taya de la pebe thengis.
So then another technique or another way to look at this is from the perspective of the commonality of all sentient beings, that all sentient beings are equal in the sense that all of us desire happiness and do not want suffering. And this simple fact could help us practice generosity or to kind of practice or cultivate love and compassion in ourselves. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he repeatedly in all his public speeches stresses the point that the 7 billion human beings on this earth, we are all the same in being human beings. And then herein, when we say we are all the same in being human beings, it just does not mean that as humans we are similar. It means that we are all the same in our pursuit to want happiness and not want suffering. So this simple fact that we are all equal in this wanting of happiness and not wanting suffering should serve to bring us closer to each other, should serve to make us able to kind of be empathetic with each other, sympathetic with each other. And from these acceptance of this fact, then there is a basis to cultivate love and compassion with each other. Yes.
단다디기 시지디기 가른데오다나라 샤슈 셈래죠 텔레페 땅 단다디 슐로가 되는디 슐로가 지에 되는디 엔치디기 탑된 거라 샤슈 이네 제바디기 돈이 또 비시르르 된 거리 이네 탑 탐라운데 조던 탑 샤슈 셈래죠라 타코도 이 샤슈 셈래네 가리나 사메죠라 샤슈 셈래다 아무지 테바침비 안에 셈지체 디기 셈 저런 셈지체 셈도 간데죠라나 신심제 담지기 동일가 미투 봐. 예 동일에 텐데기 삼바시고다. 또 그런 생이로 샤와나 갈라. 젠데도 조사라 미기랑게 젠데도 조사라 미기랑게 조스 집인데 바다 순대도 집이 대체 남지 주고 집이 조이 지나버리다. 베츠리부라 간다고 도도 셔이나 디일로도 셈디 샤주고 셈레다 가나. 젠데도 조사라 미기래라 가다 신심제 다시 사제 고말라 고고사 일로시라. 얘네도 조사나 메히 다디퍼루래야 랑게 조스 치고라 조르다 조 다디르 상춘도 바다 잔데도 바다 니라 조스 치빈도 바다 손에도 대전 랑게 주고 된데기 상추기 셈도 가르나 대바침보 텔레 최기 god나 저 god디는 주스나 대바침 차가 god디는 비스나 대바침 마인게 라 사무탄도 디차 주고 집이 대전 람지 조이 지나리 대바침보가 람데스 so he 가르스네 얘기 넘버 10바지 레르네 아주 생기 돌는 도단 엔데르라 아무도 지라실
Then now in these 8 verses in the text, as we mentioned before, the first 7 kind of explain to us the methods, and these 8th one, the last one, talks about the wisdom aspect of the practice. And now from these first 7 verses, the 7th verse in particular talks about the supreme method of bodhicitta, or the aspiration to become a bodhisattva. And herein the question arises, of course, what do you mean by bodhicitta, or what do you mean by becoming a bodhisattva? Then the practice of bodhicitta is a unique feature of the Mahayana tradition, and herein it is defined in this manner. Even though there is a very technical definition of the bodhicitta, it is kind of mentioned in the Mahayana text, but the rough kind of translation would be, the rough kind of definition would be a mind or mind that is motivated with the aim to alleviate the suffering of others. And not only that, a mind that is motivated to bring all sentient beings out of this suffering by leading them to liberation. So this is the altruistic intention of bodhicitta as defined in the Mahayana tradition. And the door to becoming a Mahayana practitioner is actually this very intention, this bodhicitta, this altruistic intention. Last.
그래서 언제 다디 다디가 너무 상주생래 그런 거 중요이나 봐. 학원으로 가서 상주생래 가서 야보고 있어라 지도. 학원은 마고네 되지라 학원은 싫으시 장.
So then I want to hear from you, like, have you heard about this bodhicitta or this bodhisattva business before? I want to kind of hear your ideas about this.
Yes?
Yes, so I've heard about 37 ways of Bodhisattva, and I've heard about bodhicitta, but I don't know exactly if I'm able to, like arouse bodhicitta in me, and how do I do it being genuine in it, because it's so difficult to think in that way. So what would you suggest for us to do, apart from what's in here, to arouse this genuine feeling of this genuine aspiration?
Lo dinde chi semna che pekhapuras ni chuma moimba chiura dinde lo chi dinde chi ni tanda dina mashi juru kapshi do kayunas. Let's hear from the rest of the group too. Yes.
I really like I spent a couple of weeks in a Zen monastery, Buddhist Zen, South India. And there
Where?
In Kodaikanal, Buddhism.
Oh.
You've heard about it.
Kodaikanal.
And there they called it heart mind. And I really, really liked that description. It really helped me to understand. Basically, it's the pure intuition, a source of pure thought and feeling, but it's not a thought from the mind, and it's not a feeling from the heart. It's something that is divine, that is inherent within us. And once we cultivate that connection to this divine intuition, we're able to act from a pure place. The way I was able to cultivate that is by meditating a lot and cultivating trust in that sense, because it's a sense that is beyond thought or feeling, but it's noticeable.
But it's not?
It's noticeable. I was able to debate conflicting emotions or feelings or ideas that I had, and find an answer by meditating on it and looking for the answer from the bodhicitta in the heart mind.
Kun gizadis minrachisa. Ku tanda kharsa. Pi Kodaikanal jagal hojoira. Dila ni Japanese ki zen gi dire kompa dojil densir.
Zen dira zen kibuba.
Mare zen lana nihon gi nangba ge tawa jiya. Tanda nga zo hashang gi tawa dodir. Di jai hashang tawa jiya.
Ale kuru hindu
Chan la yo jami.
Ale
Ditabush. Kanzo ida
Number
ida. Number rela warda kanzo ra.
Chan la bola bole.
Nima kanzo pela samela tanda trolling sorla ro. Jagi hashang gi tawa jiya. Odi tawa dirta. De number rela warda.
Number is muso di compagnie nunere.
Ta Quranzo duchilo ga jiya. Ta Quranzo gi duchila shinna tanda kanzo chanju sembala jura. Di ni hard mind lan dishi jaidus. Hard lan ning. Tas ning da mind lan ta sem la ore lo. Ning lo lan dishi jaidus. Sikdi pheju dance. Sikdi pheju dang go jumzi chirla na. No semne samlo gi dota joira. Toba gi chitasha jo ji maimba. Ning ne chowa shukshim bu chowa rang le de ji maimba. Lo de do ji la. Ni ni ja maimbe lo rangshin gi mi gi simju la jo. Mo dinde lo ji la munzi chi gi resra. This lo de ni samlo ye me ba chowa e maimba. Dinde lo ji la munzi chi dus. Wo di ngonzo gi da chan la na zen la na ra. Di tawa dinde do chi gi Buddhism ba karsa chanju symbol and dish jai modus. Di dish dige ko chi shu pembo chungsul shingd.
Kora dili pengi tunda ra suzonguni lo lu yuwa do da pengi ndiga nyamni chana diwa ra. Sidangi pengi tunda tambo ale tende jiga ani kare kare tagi de diga tan lo jo ma che pekhe shimur. Ra digi dula ne am di tsingba ma yiba tep shimba khasan dam lo. Ra mata je te shir. Mata chik gal do sha na dimda diga tan do te shimba khar lo ani shima ni chana lo mal ma do. Mata chik shingi dula sha na ya do nga. Diga tan do lo jo che pekhe jo. Jang kora tona ma bu chini jinsar. Ra.
So I get the feeling that you are a very observant person. from your sharings. And as I heard about this heart mind that you talked about, if it is a beneficial technique for you to approach things, then it is good. But don't be satisfied with just that. Try to explore.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. This is a Delhi in Lawarda.
Hello, yeah.
Otherwise, it just the.
Rich. Tako odiyo. Because Sami is the Shena Josavera. Samuel and you more dolin chimbuchora.
Dear home, yeah.
Ale. Lava Bola. Now, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, of course, has some elements and disagreements with the way that Zen approaches Buddhism. This, I'm saying it from my side now. And when we look at the historical account of this, because before Buddhism came to Tibet, it came to China. This is one weird fact of history, that there was a whole landmass between China and India, but somehow it reached China first. And from China it went to Japan. And Buddhism in the border areas, of course, Tibet and China had borders. And then Buddhism was kind of promulgated in the 7th century by the king of Tibet. And then in the 8th century, another king wanted to systemize this doctrine as a religion. So then he heard about all of these different interpretations of the Buddha's teachings, and then he invited all the school of thought, scholars, masters in their own rights to come and debate now. And whoever wins the debate, the Tibetans will follow that system of thought. And then the Chinese, they were invited, and the whole kind of debate centered around the interpretation of emptiness. And the Chinese apparently were defeated from the historical account in the debate. And then Tibet said, okay, this particular interpretation of the Buddha's teaching we won't adopt, and we will adopt the Indian interpretation, especially the Nalanda interpretation of the Buddha's teachings. So this is why there is a contradiction in the interpretation of the wisdom of emptiness between Zen Buddhism and the normal Indian tradition of Buddhism.
Can I ask a question? The Zen center I was studying was Mahayana based.
Yeah, of course. They say it is Mahayana, but
it's still different?
Yes. Mahayana, they are both Mahayana, because the Theravada practitioners would not even talk about bodhicitta. They strictly follow the word of the Buddha. And they are very classicists in that sense. And for them, conduct is more important than philosophical interpolations.
Right.
Can you please repeat the question?
La. Yuri, this is the Beja de la Kala in So, if you want to look at this particular interesting fact of history and where these differences arise, then it is kind of explored detail in this text by Babungarwa, in Babunga Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hands. And
yeah, I give you, because then you will have this thing about the Asham and the debate about the interpretation of emptiness. That will interest you.
You had a question.
I wanted you to repeat the question, if you can, the definition that you got before.
About bodhicitta?
Yeah.
The bodhicitta is that mind or that intention, that mind which is informed by the motivation or intention to alleviate the suffering of others, and not only that, to alleviate the suffering of others by bringing them to liberation. This is the altruistic intention of bodhicitta. So there is a more technical definition, of course, but this is a very rough definition.
It's quite concise. It's good.
So the spiritual tradition that I grew up in is Sikhism. And so it's very natural in the tradition. Most of the gurus in the line, they've given their lives protecting the faith of others. Not most, but at least 4 or 5 of them of the 10. And so the idea of alleviating the suffering of others is very natural to this faith. But what is probably interesting in the context here of leading others out of suffering, this bit, because Sikhism was very careful not to be a missionary religion, it tried to stay away from that. So even if they helped a Hindu, they let the Hindu be the Hindu. They helped a Muslim, they let a Muslim be a Muslim. And the first Guru Nanak, who was the first Guru in the line, he had a Hindu and a Muslim as his companions when they sang songs in the praise of God. So even the idea of not alleviating the suffering of others, I feel is coming from a very pure intention of letting people be themselves as well. But it's just a thought and a reflection that is coming right now.
Quran di chulugi jabjung di Sikhism tanda kanzo chudine isra ni jabjung di da ni luk di na la ira Quran zo gi temba do la na da guru mambu chi ze ra changa chudo chi ze da guru nanak ne chine ma tini di na na yo gi guru mambu shim changma mene nga tuks ke shinga ski yora Quran gi so Quran le da yores so le da jumzen chirela na mishinda gi theba yora ko hindu ina ko khaji ina mishinda gi theba di sungjob cheji do so le da yores so siki ina yora mishinda gi da theba jora theba la na mishinda gi da chue ko khaji ko hindu re la ne yora chue di da jabe che do yora so le da yores tinde inde zamani mishinda ki dunye la ni sedap chie la di rangshin ki luk dina la chi shen weres Quranzo di Sikhism na la ina kunzo ki Sikhism ki khadyu ine sab khare che wer na thanda nganzo ishu ki chue chi chi yora saja da me da la do chopa su gomba su mil roba chi gi yora de chedan jora di jinda di chedan de kunzo che chi gi mes kajana di june chue joryung yora kunzo ki di tawa de chune chi gi me la yores khadyu ine 힌두이나 힌두랑 대주 가지이나 가지랑 대주는 되게 따와베 야부지 고양부지 요레스 제장다 디 뒤와랑 말도 지 그런 신이 됐었어요 소와든데 칠레네 아니 디 제자니 미신달라 동이 네 자베기 탑시우시우지 배주만 탑시 마치네라 미드저 간데 이메 된데 내 디바니 개침 보통 네 샤가 디바니 개침 보통 것도
이네 다 나저는 맹 되게 동해지 나온 데가 무슨 시월아 지단들이 지다 이 추루주에다 시라디 칼리콘도 라 대상 거라 주니어를 때 그들이 가상 담보는 거 저기 비디샤 잠니가 칼라담도 이번나시지 출루도 근데도 지가 인상 수술을 팽가르던 데더라 그러나 무슨 칼라레데 zu불 팽야지라 무슨 zu부처에 리처 세상에 가라도 되나는 민담도 여 인상 야 담보도 디시주디들이 세상 출루이네 이슈이네 힌두이네 같이 있는 남바이네 그래네 나랑슬 펜스 도든 라 라네타 라 펜마도 나 인지미지데 쇼지야 자신 최고야 좀다 와 네 펜토 마도 담보티스 하코고에 계신보라 같이 하마고네 안간조데 야시 고조 도시데 엔데 치다 어디 체죠 라 인지미지 신야데 베계신보 다 신이 인자 신 정말 신이 알레디 야시를 섬때가 디간도나 게임도 라 인지미지처럼 남바야 야시를 주고야 뭐처럼 힌두 야시를 도감 당한서 세상 가서 얘기라기다 줄루래 디지단 잠리가 담다 주리 디기 미 칼라 감도 정말 팬데오라 시게는 시코랑이 줄루 추진이라 팬고라 이슈이네 이슈 코랑이 추진이라 팬고라 냠내진 코로코로 스키 디도라 오 디나제 딜레 집에 샤와이나 먼저 째자고야 디 차고 말라 배나서 칼라도 샤 그런 데간데 데모간데모데 발레간 발레사지 그런 딜 가고말 디가고라 우스잖아 그런 가르쳐진다면서 그냥 줄루 가르치도디 그 양반이 야시르라 다양 줄루 주제 답이나 주인지메지 디치고르딩 어도도 야보배는데 제마이래 다이는 아주 근데 지시사지를 내서는 So the Shinji Lavora, and so the dinner is didn't zoom and so the Bara. Penangado Hindu Jaman into the Yapajankar, dinner Yapan Hajan, so Yamache. How they did it.
So then, yes, it is just like you said, and then as we also kind of discussed at the start of this course, that all religious traditions have something to offer to us, and all religious traditions have the common core advice or the common core aim to make better people or make good human beings. And with this kind of acceptance that all religious traditions are actually have the same aim, then it is important to be open-minded to listen to the kind of belief systems of others and the assertions of these various different traditions. If we are not able to listen and say that we are being secular, then it's pointless. Right? We have to be able to listen to their assertions, and if there is something that we can pick up, something that is of benefit to us, then we should pick these up from any tradition, irrespective of what they are. And if there are some things that you do not agree with, then it does not mean that you should renounce that religion or say something like, this religion is bad, out of a sense of aversion or a sense of allegiance to your own religion. This is not the attitude to adopt, of course. And then, as we also talked about in the beginning of this session, that just as all human beings have different dietary preferences, food preferences. Some people like rice as a stable diet. Some people do not like rice as a stable diet. And now to force those people who do not like rice to eat rice, this is a tough business. And then similarly, then same with religion. Some different people have different inclinations, right? So people who are not inclined to follow certain ideals, as mentioned in these traditions, if they are being forced forced upon them such ideals, then it doesn't make sense. So this is the manner in which we need to approach it. Yes, we need to be secular, but we need to be secular with open mind. Yes.
지당한적이 줄을래 파서 줄을다 콘도 줄을 자래야 먼저 줄을 빔 지당이 나도 고마쳐던 데리 시험다 봐 지당 그 펜토니지를 토대고라 펜토니지를 아니 디 마베탄 누르 배나 나도 빼도 주셔야나 수수 파마도 나 이해 봐만 나라 빼까지 해보라 콜로 개고시 말이라 얘다 봐 근데 그 이해 파마 빼도 자라는 나 누르 대나시기 수수수 줄이 코라코라스라 팽거여라 아 저한테 야고 말이 지게되다 내가 지당 간주 야봄더라 잠내가 미상마 참부치 올려야 지게 아니 간주기 디삼타나야다 코라 찍을 팽해 되고 다 간지 봐 되게 팽해 됐을 때는 간주기 구셔신을 되고다 대바체 맞아 수수 대바체라 줄수이나 그런 걸 대치도문에 야버를 코란스를 팽거래 파게 취나 그런 야버를 코란스 미 마모지를 팽거래 수수띠기 제스는 대바다 이치 맞아 되바래 이내야 미기 줄을 아마부터 되네 가서 지지요 말아 따따 아주 자주 생각을 해 이내 되나 괜찮은지도
Now we are really going away from the topic of this discussion, which is the attitude of this intention of bodhicitta. But I find it very important to kind of address this, because we talk a lot about secularism. And then as we talk about secularism, then we need to have a genuine sense of respect for other traditions. It does not mean that you need to have faith in the other tradition. Just to have a genuine sense of respect to all traditions is very important. And then as we look at these different traditions, then we know that there are many followers of these traditions, and for them this particular traditions brings about great sense of benefit and great sense of joy for them. So you need to respect them for this simple fact too. So now, yeah, it just took we veered off in a different direction, but now coming back to bodhicitta. kunzushinda sheyenara
tadilana ndise penechigda penesu tani ngegi phamade ngala yashura ra 니게 파마 참아 딜라나 깔 커버 춘사마 니 파마 야포 쪼고일라나 라투마 나 까지 심브랑 아래 야포레 이니 춘사마 니게 아파마디 큐란즈 파마 나시 쪼고일라나 깔 커버라 라 니게 춘사 파마 나시데 파마디 니게 파마 쪼고라 쯔투에 깔 커버라 소소를 펜펜도 여러 소소 하고라 딜라나 아테 지 칼고 아데 베라 베데니 로라 다 추데 소게 파마 나시 쪼 코나츠 코라 소소 펜토라 아니 심바트와이나 텐디
The Jura.
Yeah.
So one simple way of looking at this is like, let's say I have my parents, and my parents, I'm very grateful to them, right? But I don't have the right to say like everybody should treat my parents with respect, right? Everybody should everybody should treat my parents as their parents. We cannot say that. So from this very simple example, we can know that we need to kind of not force one's own ideals upon others. Yes.
Yeah, that was the reflection.
That's Yes.
So, to be honest, maybe that is exactly the question of what we are discussing, but I'm a little lost. What is bodhicitta? Like, I don't know. This is one point where I'm a little bit hanging right now, and the second is a thought, and that is all my suffering brought me to sit here today. If not for my story of my own suffering, I would not have woken up to that point that I am sitting right here. So actually, when I don't want anybody else to take my suffering, not at all. And that is where I'm a little bit also stuck here with this whole thought.
모기 티와 다랑을 카르기드스라 보디치다 간서 전주sem는 강아래 디랑 가ring 고츠임인데스 디에니 삼루신다진 땅은 땅은 저기 미시행기 동에 세워라기요라 동에 세워라도 좀 삼루직다는 기싱알라 단다고 나랑 동에 몸부지 용요라 디 마뇽는 같은다 디 사제 될레메를 단나가 될 데메라이트 라 제자니 나기 삼루직 땅인데 좀 계승알 동링아랑기 동리 등아이 용면은 나델라다 니세워도 될레 마용아스 라 제장이 동리다 미신달 춘이 띠미스 알다 쇼자치 모이스 드리도실스
레옹 제자단나 가족이 상주세래디 가주주의 신기도 따라 다이네 콘소에 대기신 것이도 되더라 다이네 제자 상주세래다는 게 라차랑 한대지를 로한대지메다 비지데 사거라 다가도 상주세 계단들이야 상주 그 센스니 로치바제 신이라 사모다니 로지리라 체니도 참아도에네 베데 름보여라 다 간달로야 보시 소수지 삼다 마인기 신심전 하지가 삼다 신다 사모다니 로지를 샤워라 고데우지는 샤워이나 다 체니데 아보시에게 되버이나라 아니 페샤트 로 상주세네 간데 주가르 쟁가르 간데치기도 냠네 가르치고 디상말로로나 아니 싱이라 다나가서디 레와 삼지시 까레 카페레 어제 체니데 자니도 로마보 쇠고라 티지네 아니 티지 샘지 콜로코로 샘지 커라치 폴랑도 로시르체 라 다나가서디 치스 가지질 시에치다 말에 이네 디에 센주체마 다나가서 그 데지레사네 젤 로브체 태블로야다 그런 사마 태블로 싱이다 라 근데 아니 저기 칼로 로야기 소소다 고논데 파트너에 디고라 차시타와 마시와이나
now like what is bodhicitta? This kind of question we already kind of addressed. It's the intention, the mind that is that is informed by the intention or motivation to alleviate the suffering of others and to bring them to liberation. And then like your whole activity is informed by this motivation. This is the kind of rough definition of a bodhicitta. It is that altruistic motivation or intention. And now the real question is, how do we generate this altruistic intention or motivation? And now it's no easy business. It's not an easy practice, of course, and it's kind of impossible to like explain the methods in one session. It falls upon the student to kind of read and investigate and explore this on his or her own time too. Because in the monastic education we spend years debating this generation of motivation to come at an understanding, so it's not easy to kind of explain it in one session. So I encourage you to explore like what are the causes that is able to generate such a motivation, what are the factors that must be met to generate such a motivation. So all these kind of questions I'm giving to you, which you can explore by reading the other source material, and then you will have a better understanding of what bodhicitta is really. And that's all.
다 산주 비슷한 단대기 제대로 쳐봐지 되는 주래라가 다디 칸데스 지기래는 콜 주고라 지금 제분 거고 가래는 지게기 주다 쟁다 아니 창오라 특히 주로들 가래라는 거라 주문에디 아 산주생 주로들 다신년 주고 다 산지랑 주라 칸데스 지기래지 제비 고로지 다 타마 가래라는 이유였으라 지등한테 다신년 주고 봐 다다 신참 집어이다 대원도가 동네면도 집어고마이나 되게 아니 로지 투고 라 주직대 차고 지대야 rum바시는 준도 진대명아 don라도 코라야 되라 코라기 주라 tambo delishla.
So then to kind of give you a rough idea about how to approach this generation of to generate this altruistic motivation in oneself. First, we need to ask the question, what is the cause of such a mind, right? And what are the factors that facilitate such a mind or such a motivation? And then it could be explored through these two doors. The first one is a repeated examination of the fact and acceptance of the fact that all sentient beings are equal. There is no real difference between one and others. If you are able to kind of repeatedly meditate on this aspect, then a sense of this motivation arises in us, right? This generation of equalness, this attitude of equalness between one and others, that we are the same. There is no like real difference between one and others, self and others. And the other one is very detailed. The other door is a very detailed, step-by-step kind of process, wherein it's by taking tadi mengarwa. So then the other door is through following like the 7 steps of like these pit instructions of bodhicitta. So yeah, otherwise known as the 7 causes and fruits of bodhicitta.
Yeah, the 7 causes and the fruit is bodhicitta.
The 7 causes and the fruit is bodhicitta. Yes.
Okay.